Hello, I'm coming to you live on tape from Sydney, Ohio, and today we're talking Doink the Clown. Now I know Dark Side of the Ring covered Doink the Clown in season 4, and that's on Hulu. But that's all about Matt Bourne, and we're going to talk about some of the other Doink the Clowns today, because there was many of them. And we're also going to talk about Matt Bourne, but I'm going to give you more information on Matt Bourne and some of the various doinks he played over the years than Dark Side of the Ring did. I'm going to give you other information on Matt Bourne and how he played doinks over the years than Dark Side of the Ring did. And I'm also going to talk about Ray Apollo, who played Doink after Matt Bourne. And I'm going to talk about Steve Kern, who played the duplicate Doink at WrestleMania 9. I'm also going to talk about, I'm not going to really talk about Brooklyn Brawler, because everybody knows who Brooklyn Brawler is. He played Doink very briefly. But I am going to talk about Ray Apollo, who is known as Doink. He has the Doink Twitter page. He was the face Doink, while Matt Bourne was the heel Doink. So getting in, first we're going to talk about Matt Bourne, who was born in the Pacific Northwest. He was born in like Washington or Oregon or something. I don't remember which one. I said, if you want more information than I give you on Matt Bourne, go watch Dark Side of the Ring. It's on Hulu. It's in season 4. It's called Doink the Clown. He was born in the Pacific Northwest. He's a second-generation wrestler. His father was Tony Bourne. Got into wrestling. Won several titles on the independent circuit. And eventually made his way to WWF, where he wrestled Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in WrestleMania 1. Left WWF, made his way to WCW, where he played Big Josh, who was from the Pacific Northwest, and liked to dance with bears and hit people with a stick or something. I think it was a stick. He hit people with a piece of stick. He was a face character. Matt Bourne really didn't like to play face characters. But yeah, he was a face. And Matt Bourne really didn't like to play faces, but he was a Big Josh was a face. Eventually, he made his way back to WWF. And they brought him in originally as Matt Bourne, and then him and Tim Hegstrand came up with this character of an evil clown called Doink the Clown. And Matt was really good at it. Originally, Doink debuted in 1992, but he didn't wrestle yet. He just played pranks on various members of the crowd. He debuted in the crowd and played pranks on various members of the crowd. In 1993, he made his wrestling debut and won his first match. His most notable match in 1993 was against Crush at WrestleMania 9, which he won thanks to the second Doink, or the duplicate Doink, which was played by Steve Kern, who also was known as Skinner earlier in his WWF career. And Steve Kern was originally from Florida. His dad was a pilot in World War II and was taken as a POW. He was released. Then his dad fought in Vietnam and was taken as a POW and was a POW for 7 years before he was released. And Steve Kern was a wrestler from Florida. And his gimmick Skinner was a man from Florida who liked to wrestle alligators. And he had a big alligator claw with him, which he hit people with. He was a heel, as you can guess. And it was one of those cartoony gimmicks. That's one of the more famous ones from the WWF in the early 90s because of how outrageous it was. But Steve Keirn kind of made it work, but never really got hugely over. But people do know the Skinner character who have watched wrestling. And so Steve Keirn was the duplicate Doink, and he crushed her with prosthetic arm, getting Matt Bourne's Doink the win. Doink then went on to wrestle Macho Man Randy Savage on an early episode of Monday Night Raw. He went on to wrestle in place of Lawler. Lawler feigned an injury, and he went on to wrestle Bret Hart in the main event of the show. And then they had the idea, because Doink was getting cheered, even though he was playing cruel pranks on people, Doink was getting cheered because people loved the gimmick, to turn him face. Well, Matt Bourne had a problem with this. He did not want Doink to turn face. So I tried putting Matt Bourne in various other gimmicks, and I put Steve Lombardo, also known as the Brooklyn Brawler, under the makeup. Well, Steve Lombardo didn't quite work well under the makeup as a face Doink. So they brought in Ray Apollo. Ray Apollo he wrestled in the National Wrestling League and was a tag team champion. He formed a tag team called the New York City Boys at some point earlier in his career. I can't find a lot of information about Ray Apollo. I gotta apologize for this. And at Starrcade 1990, him wrestling as Sergeant Kruger and his partner, Colonel DeClerc, fought the Steiner brothers, and the Steiner brothers won. And so they brought him in, and he says he didn't know a whole lot about what was going on, but he knew that they were bringing him in as a face Doink because the guy who was playing him didn't want to be the face Doink. He wanted to stay a heel. And he says he was nervous, and they gave him pointers on how they wanted him to do it, but he did it kind of with the pointers, but also kind of his way. And Doink as a heel, his finisher was the stump puller, which is where he sat on their shoulders and pulled their leg back in kind of a Boston Crab type move, only it was one-legged. But face Doink's finisher was the whoopee cushion, which was a seated senton. Ray Apollo is known as the face Doink. Now, Matt Bourne would later get fired from the WWF for drug issues, because he was a big-time druggie. He would then go on to ECW and try to wrestle as Doink, but he'd get a cease and desist letter. And so in a match with Shane Douglas for the world title, Shane would give a big speech about how WWF made Matt Bourne, the wrestler, into a comic relief character as Doink, and how he was going to make the real Matt Bourne come out. And so Matt Bourne reinvented himself as Born Again, where he painted only half his face with clown makeup and had kind of the Doink headpiece, but not Doink hair. Instead, he grew his own hair out and his own beard out, and would put the Doink headpiece on his opponents when he beat them. But once again, he had to leave ECW because of his own personal drug issues. He would later go on to leave wrestling and come back several times, including bringing the Doink character back as after the Dark Knight came out, kind of dressed up as the Joker from The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger's Joker, calling it Reborn Again, because he couldn't wrestle on the independent scene as Doink. And even wrestling once on the independent scene as Doink and winning the Wrecking Ball World title, and then after that he just continued to wrestle as Doink on the independent scene. Sadly, he died in 2013 of a drug overdose. Now, as for Ray Apollo, he would continue to wrestle in WWE as the face Doink in the 1990s, because Doink didn't make it out in the 1990s. And Santa would give him a present in a midget dressed up as Doink, which he named Dink. And he would go on and have a variety of matches, including one with him and Dink versus Bam Bam Bigelow and Luna Vachon at Survivor Series. And then a famous one with Doink, Dink, Wink, and Pink. Dink, Wink, and Pink were midgets against Jerry Lawler's team of Jerry Lawler, Wheezy, Sleazy, and Cheesy. Which Wheezy, Sleazy, and Cheesy were once again midgets at Survivor Series, which was voted the worst worked match of the year. And it goes down history as one of the worst matches of all time. Which I can't see why a match with 2 grown men and 6 midgets would possibly go down as one of the worst matches of all time. But Doink would not last long. He'd have a feud with Jeff Jarrett, in which Jeff Jarrett dressed up as Doink to beat up Dink. His last appearance with WWF, well, his last appearance as a main member of the WWF roster was with Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1997, where Stone Cold gave him a stunner to chance of Kill the Clown. Ray Apollo would later come back at WrestleMania 17 in the Gimmick Battle Royal and wrestle as Doink. Matt Bourne would come back and wrestle as Doink at the Raw 15th anniversary show for a 15-man Battle Royal. And the rest of the various Doinks who wrestled as Doinks throughout the year were neither man. Some were played by Nick Dinsmore. Some were played by Steve Lombardo. Chris Jericho once dressed up as Doink to get advantage over William Regal. And a bunch of other people have dressed up as Doink to get advantage over people. And Ray Apollo would wrestle as Doink till he retired on the independent circuit in 2000. I'm thinking 2015. And as I said, Matt Bourne wrestled as Doink till he died in 2013. So if you're seeing a Doink on the independent circuit nowadays, it's not the real Doink. Because various people on the independent circuit wrestle as Doink. But Ray Apollo still makes appearances as Doink, but he doesn't wrestle. So if you're seeing a wrestler called Doink the Clown wrestling on the independent circuit nowadays, they didn't play Doink in WWE. Unless it's Nick Dinsmore, which I don't think he'd wrestle as Doink. I think he'd wrestle as Eugene. And Steve Lombardo, I think he's retired because he's been wrestling since the 80s. Even if he did wrestle, he'd wrestle as the Brooklyn Brawler. So, and Doink, in other media, he's been in various WWF video games, including the last 2, WWE 2K22 and WWE 2K23, both the heel personas of Doink. That's about all I got to say about Doink. Wow, this video took 15 minutes. As I said, if you want to go learn more about Matt Bourne, go to Hulu, go to Dark Side of the Ring. It's a season 4 episode. It's called Doink the Clown. You can learn a ton about Matt Bourne. You can learn all about his kids, all about his drug relationships. They tell you he got fired, but he actually left the character before he got fired. Join me next week. We will talk about something.